Oh, all right. Finally. Hey, we're going to actually have a meeting today. We're 10 after. I apologize for that. I've gotten us all mixed up. This is the Meshery build and release meeting. We have it, well, almost every 2 weeks. It's actually the second Thursday and the fourth Thursday. That's what we're scheduled for currently. And I want to talk about that as one of our agenda items. So my name's Lee, and I'm one of the maintainers. That we've got a few maintainers on the call. And I want to talk about the need for additional maintainers, actually. Specifically in this area, there's lots to do, and not all of it's getting done. So if you're on the call and you haven't had time to introduce yourself or say hi to others, now's a great time. I'm familiar with everyone that's on the call, but would anyone like to say hi? Does anybody feel like they haven't gotten a chance to introduce to other people?
I mean, I've been poking around on a few meetings, but this is my first time in this meeting, so I can say hi. So hi, I'm Chris. Uh, yeah, I've been helping on some of the Artifact Hub integration, but I've also worked on CI/CD stuff in the past, so I was just curious to see how this meeting works and learn more. So yeah, I'm just here mostly to listen and I guess help where I can.
Beautiful. Chris took some of the words out of my mouth. There's speaking of Artifact Hub, there's more roadmap there, and so go have a chat with Chris if that interests you. He's championing that area. Well, good. So hey, we've got the meeting minutes up here. One of the first items that to cover is meeting time. The other meetings that we have generally start a little earlier in the day, and that's to try to find some magic sweet spot where people can be awake to attend. And so there's I don't know, we've had a change of stewardship of, I think, is Mario on? Nope. So Mario is one of Meshery's maintainers. He's a maintainer in this area. And he works at F5. One of his colleagues is also at F5, was an earlier maintainer. They both live in Mexico, so in the central time zone, same time zone that I'm in. And it was convenient to them to have it sort of over the lunch hour or right next to the lunch hour for us. The prior maintainer and Mario both aren't here now, but there are a lot of other people whose time zone is a lot earlier in the day, other than, well, Jared, Chris, and I. And maybe Jared, Chris, and I are all on because it actually is during the middle of the day for us, not like some weird hour. Anyway, there's been a recent proposal, and so I'd like for you all to consider whether or not moving this meeting to 3 hours earlier to a 9 a.m. Central or a 7 a.m. Pacific, a 10 a.m. Eastern, to speak to the time zones that I can actually calculate in my head. If that timing would work, I'll let you all think about it. Maybe you could sound off in chat as a way of yay or nay for this time. If you're happen to be calling in from India, then it would be, is that 7:30 p.m. IST? So basically the same time as the Meshery dev meeting. And then that's part of the question. The second part of the question is, I think the proposal is to continue to meet on the second and fourth Thursdays. If you've subscribed to the community calendar around here, you might have noticed that there's a CNCF tag network meeting or technical advisory group meeting. It meets every first and third Thursday. So we're just offset from them. Part of that is just for me personally, I chair that tag, And it's nice that we offset every other Thursday. And if this meeting gets big enough, though, then I would love for it to not have anything to do with me or like be based around me in any given way. That would be wonderful. That's the other part of what I wanted to talk about today is that, well, we recently were flirting with Jared Culpepper about doing some maintenance type things here on the call. And so we're just going to continue to do that with Jared and with Sangram Roth as well. Both of them have been, well, consistently contributing, and Jared's something of an OG, actually. He's been around for quite some long time. And we just want to continue to encourage them and empower them to lead the way. And that statement hopefully goes for all of the rest of you. Or rather, I say hopefully because hopefully you feel like you are empowered. I think one of the things that we might get wrong in this community is saying yes, maybe too much. Because usually when someone suggests something, it's like, yes, let's do that. Or some form of that, like, let's do it. So please know that you're empowered. Please know that there's all kinds of things to do. If you're hot on Twitter, like, we barely tweet the project. How terrible. How terrible. There are tweets to be made, and I'm sure that any of you can think of some of them. What I'm trying to give an example of is like, there's all kinds of concerns around or responsibilities around the project. This CI meeting is an example of them. There's a ton. So yeah. Yeah, please don't
Yeah,
have.
Lee, give me maybe a week or two more to work on my life, and we'll see if I can commit to it.
let, let me know where I can
I'm
send.
shooting for a big Mother's Day gesture, and
Yeah.
and then following that up with, by the way, can I do this thing?
While you're elated and happy about these flowers, maybe we could talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Good. Good, good. Okay, if I guess we'll transition to maybe the next topic there, but feel free to reach out to me or to the other maintainers to talk about stewardship or meeting times or tweeting, or like there's a lot. Hey, so good. Finally, we can get to the first actual topic, which I think Abid has got. Abid, you want to give a little bit of background as to the framework and tooling that's being used today and why we're talking about Playwright?
Yeah. Let me share the doc link.
So today, the project uses Cypress as one of the tools to help do testing. And I'm only filling in the dead air while you get going.
Yeah. So right now we have multiple front-end projects. Meshery is one of the biggest ones out there. We have an extensive front-end app like one through which we interact with the vast facilities that Meshery provides, and some workflows inside there are complex. So there are like different kinds of workflows through which we go through the app, and each of those need to be tested. And for the UI testing, right now we're employing Cypress, which is a UI test end-to-end test runner. Right now we use Cypress to perform those end-to-end tests. And then there are also like some other tests that were like the unit testers using the Jest, which are library, and we use that for the unit tests and Cypress for the end-to-end tests. So right now we are transitioning to using Playwright, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So one of the biggest reasons is that the current tests are pretty flaky, like they are not that much of useful. And part of the reason is Cypress itself, because how the philosophy behind the writing tests in Cypress employs implicit delays and timers. So it doesn't go well with when we are testing a React app. So Meshery and most of the extensions that Meshery has, all of these are React apps, and they are not like our common day-to-day apps that the common today apps that we have. These are reactive apps, and Cypress doesn't go well with them because we don't know the indeterministic behavior. Like we don't know when an event will come back from the server. We can't know. We can't, like, if I wait for 1 second or 2 seconds, we don't know like what is the timing that an event would come back from the server. When I deploy some component or a service, I don't know when it would get deployed. So I don't know how much time to sleep. So what we do is like we try to have these big sleep timeouts, right? And so I will maybe wait for 20 seconds inside the test somewhere till that thing is deployed. But that's flaky because some component would take that much time, some won't. So we have those false negatives and we can't trust our test item. And also like the other thing is like most of the tests are broken because we have moved away from the features that we had that time and we didn't maintain the test. So because we already had to rewrite the test, so we thought to maybe we should use a better framework that follows our application standards and what we are doing. So on through that effort, we end up choosing Playwright, and the reason is the same because it gets pretty well with the React application model because it doesn't have like that implicit delays, but it works based on timeouts and it pulls the elements that we want to see. So we don't need to put sleep or any that kind of thing. And another major benefit is it's cross-browser, so it can run tests in multiple browsers. And another benefit is that it goes pretty well with concurrency and can run parallel tests, so we can have pretty fast tests.
Hey, to recap some of that, we've been using, there's different types of test. This is one document that lives now inside of this build and release area. There's another document that talks about the build and release strategy overall. How do we do builds? What artifacts are built? Where are they kept? Like, and this one has been a while since it's been updated. It's still largely accurate, but like that logo needs to change. But so here's one that's specifically focused on, I guess, end-to-end testing of the UI. The UI end-to-end.
Other one is a pretty general. This one, like this is still a good resource, but it's kind of brief and gives an overview of other backend related stuff also. So this also interesting resource. Please.
Of the different types of testing, the end-to-end testing is you get the biggest bang for your buck out of an end-to-end test because you're not doing these smaller unit tests or these smaller integration tests or functional or feature tests. Well, you're more or less doing a feature test, but it can flex any amount of code, which makes them really great and also not so great. But we absolutely, like, we absolutely need them. They're the first ones for us to do. We will get the most mileage out of them. These run today many times over whenever someone opens up a pull request and whenever someone pushes a commit to a pull request. There are any number of tests that run. There's tons and tons of workflows. The Cypress is the tool that's used today. Cypress has a difficult time with WebSockets, which means that the GraphQL and the real-time updates that we're pushing to the UI suffer. MeshMap is one of the extensions that we talk about a lot. It's that canvas. It presents its own challenges to both Cypress and to Playwright, two very similar tools, in terms of the HTML canvas and those tools' ability to introspect the canvas is a bit difficult. That's its own challenge that's related to, but maybe separate from today's focus. Cypress is the part of the bane of our existence, I think, right now. And we've been hobbling along with it for too long. Anytime that you go to invest into tests, mean that that you've got more to maintain. And so they better be worthwhile. We've spent so much time with false positives, meaning tests that you'll see inside of a pull request will fail, the check will fail. And any number of times they're being marked as failed, but they really didn't fail, or they failed for the wrong reason, not because there was a bug and oh my gosh, the number of hours. And so there's the prevailing thought is that, and I'm sorry to repeat some of this. I figured some of it may not have been, there were some specific points that Abid dropped that are hopefully people picked up on why this other tool, the prevailing thought that Playwright is better. Abid gave some specifics and they're written in here, and I'm not going to repeat them, but suffice to say, we think that it's time to displant Cypress and replace it with Playwright. We need to make sure that the way that the tests are written are not brittle or non-fragile. Ideally, anyone who's opening up a PR is, well, accountable for a docs update, a test update, the bug fix or the feature that they're opening, the resiliency and the performance and all the itables, the extensibility of it, and and guess how much of that anyone who opens a PR is concerned with? Like none, just like the one little thing that and there becomes the difference between a drive-by contributor, which we adore and love, and a maintainer whom we spend as much time as we can supporting and elevating and teaching and instructing and putting up on a pedestal as we can, because it's a bit of work being a maintainer. You also, along with that work, comes a bunch of privilege and power, and maybe some stage time at KubeCon and a bunch of other things. There's a bunch of things, but now I'm droning on. What I'm trying to say is we don't want to write brittle tests. It's an investment. If the investment isn't paying off, then we should just get rid of the stinking tests. If we get rid of the stinking tests, man, are we in deep poop with users who first of all, we're lucky if any software project's lucky if somebody comes by and tries out what you're, trying to get them to use. And then much less if they bump into a bug or something that might be the end of it. And then, oh yeah, but they'll give it a month and they'll come back and check and they'll try again. No, they probably won't. You probably had that one shot, maybe, that's a big old generalization, what I just said, but it's in part why software as a service is very popular. Why? Because a lot of us don't have that much time. You just try it out real fast. That's why we have a playground. It's in part why the CNCF is considering the hosted instance of Meshery as the CNCF hub, because all the projects have this problem. There's 200 something of them. If you're a user and you're trying to figure out which one to use, how much time that takes to deploy them, much less to deploy them and also deploy another one and test it together. Well, Meshery facilitates that. It's a sweet old deal for what you guys are building. I have totally digressed. I apologize. Back to Playwright. Seems to be a better tool, and hopefully with a little bit of forethought, Abid will have laid out something of a path that we can build upon and have a lot more confidence in the quality of Meshery.
So yeah, so part of this is like a roadmap for achieving the best tests. We have an part of what we will be talking about is how to do Playwright, right? So I will first go through this. So right now we kind of are in a bad spot because we don't have enough tests and most of them are failing, as Lee already told. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to segregate what kinds of tests we want to write and how to we get the best out of these tests. So we want a better coverage. So we want the best coverage, obviously, and we want to, but we still want efficiency. We want these tests to be efficient, because the thing is like end-to-end tests are more on the slower side, and that's bad for developer experience. So if I'm making a small change, I might be low on time. I might not run the end-to-end test, and that's the bad thing. So unit tests are good in that thing, because they test a small unit of the code base, and it's either they're pretty fast, and we typically should run them every time we make a small change, and we should run unit tests, see how they are going. And end-to-end tests span a better coverage. They span a bunch of features. Maybe we have an end-to-end test for a single feature, but they cover a large section of the code, and that's helpful in when we test the whole application as a whole. The end-to-end tests really shine there, and that they are a necessity there. So we want all of those goodness, and that's why we want to have this segregation between all of these tests, so we don't have an overlap, and we don't just do duplicate tests in unit tests and the same test in the end-to-end test. So basically what I propose here is like in the unit test, we just test the simplest of the things, like maybe those small utility functions that we have, or the core functions that get used across all of the code base. which don't depend on anything, like they don't depend on network requests, they don't depend on any kind of IO. These tests are pretty simple to write. You just know you have a contract for that function or a routine. You just need to test that contract. If I give it this input, is the output valid? So these tests should be pretty simple to write. So if you think you are doing a unit test and you end up mocking stuff, or you have to introspect what the function is done, that's why we would get it wrong, because we shouldn't be doing any of that thing. We should keep our unit tests is pretty black box, so we don't introspect anywhere. So we would have a large number of these tests, and they should be easy to write, easy to maintain, and we won't get flakiness here. And
Would these be written in a particular language, like maybe using PyTest perhaps, or Python, or
yeah, so right now for unit tests, yeah, we have an existing library that we use, it called Jest for unit tests. So it's a JavaScript library we already use it, and it's pretty good for the units, because our ecosystem is already especially for UI, we are dependent on JavaScript. So it makes more sense to use a JavaScript based library, because we are communicating with JavaScript here.
Okay.
So another thing is like these integration tests. So some parts of our application, which are like these complex workflows, these are written as state machines, and these state machines tested using integration tests. We don't want to run the whole UI and click through a bunch of elements to test a path through the state machine. It would be just slow, and we can't properly introspect if the state machine is going through the correct path, if the correct events are triggered and events are emitted, and that thing is going correctly. So we would probably employ integration tests here, and we can have a decent amount of these, because we want to test each of the path inside the state machine, so we know that state machine is valid. So those we are going to write using, maybe there's a library for XState, it's called XState test, and we might still use Playwright, so we get that browser running, but some paths through the state machines are dependent on the web page that we have on the application elements, like the canvas. Sometimes we need the canvas to test some path of the state machine, so we would still need Playwright, but we can use the XState test for going through validating the state machines. So now it's the main thing that we will talk about is the end-to-end test. So Lee already made a good case about why we're moving from Cypress. So right now, most of the tests that we have in Meshery are end-to-end tests. So we have a decent amount of them, but most of those were flaky and are not working. So we will be rewriting the same specs into Playwright, and maybe also adding new tests, because new functionality has been added into the project since those tests, and we didn't maintain them. So there will be a bunch of new tests written. So the idea of an end-to-end test is like we want to not get into the same loophole that we had previously. So we don't want flaky and brittle tests. So right now some of these guidelines are a bit more on the stricter side. So we don't digress from these, and we end up having the same problems that we had with the previous tests, is to limit the power of these end-to-end tests. So what I want is like only performing what a user would do. So the end-to-end tests would be written on a level of a user's behavior or user's interaction through the library. So these would be, again, black box. So we won't know about what's actually running the underneath of the code. We won't go there. We would only introspect and test and interact with the application as a user would know. So a user usually doesn't know like what's the class of a component. So when we add those kind of stuff, the test becomes brittle. So there's a few guidelines about how to use the locators and how to which paths to test, and how to write these tests, and how many of tests for each functionality we have. So also the first thing is like I'll go through is how to locate elements. So mostly if we should use things that a user sees, like interacting with elements through roles. So when a user sees a button, he realizes it's something that's clickable. So that element has a role of button. So we should use those role elements. So actually Playwright does it different than Cypress. So it has these things called locators. So these have an implicit timeout and they poll the element. So even if the locator is not available, it for some timeout, it would try to again fetch the DOM and see if that thing is available. So if I'm writing a test for seeing maybe that checkout button is present on the page, and when I write the test using Cypress, it will poll the DOM for some time, like maybe 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and it will check like if that checkout button is there. So what that helps us is like we don't need to add any kind of timeouts, any kind of sleeps. Say like previously we might have added maybe 3 seconds or 4 seconds of sleep and waited till then the checkout button will be present, but we don't need those things now because that thing is implicit inside the framework. So and it does it in better way because it polls it, and whenever it sees it, and if the element is wrong, it would fail the test, and if it's present, it will continue on the next test. And unless on the same thing is like we shouldn't do any kind of network interception and unless the effect is not present to the user. So maybe we might trigger some network request and we don't show to the user, so it may be in the background, then only we should intercept it. Otherwise we shouldn't, because that's not how user goes through the application. He doesn't go through the developer console and see does the save request got triggered. So we shouldn't be doing that either. And another thing is like mostly on how should we write these tests so we don't get into the flaky conditions. So I think this part I already talked about, like how we should use the implicit timeouts that Playwright provides us, or any kind of sleep. Like we shouldn't have the sleep keyword anywhere in our test, because that's why we get into problem, because the nature of the web applications, they are we don't know like what kind of sleep timeout will work. So we get into those flaky. That's the most of the case for those flaky timeouts. That element is not present and we try to check for it and we have added those sleeps and we don't know why the test breaks. So Cypress, the Playwright does a good job with these timeouts and polling. So we should utilize it, which also means utilizing of our Cypress providers like the locators, because those poll the DOM. So we should use them. And on the same lines is using dynamic timers. So Playwright out of the box provides us with these timers, but sometimes they won't work for us. Say like if I'm loading a design, a small design would work with a smaller timeout, maybe 10 seconds is good timeout for a smaller design, but the same timeout won't work for a larger design. And same goes with the network latency. If the latency of the network is large, then that timeout won't work. So what we can do is like we can have the dynamic timeouts which depend on these kinds of elements, maybe like the number of components in the design, the network latency, maybe the file size if we're uploading a file. So these make these tests more robust because we don't depend on static parameter, but what the test is actually doing. If it's running a big design, we have a better timeout suitable for that design. Another thing is like using a proper model for reusability of the test case, because the thing is like when we are testing a page, we can't define all of the interactions that will go through that page in a single test, because we are doing feature testing and we are testing each feature, but most of the features have the same flow. Like say this one feature is also going to clicking the design load, then dragging a bunch of elements, and another test where we check if the configuration of a design is set, we still go through the same interactions and then deploy the design. So all of those interactions we can't define again and again in each of these tests. So we want to have the same software engineering principles like reusability, because they would give us a better test suite that would be easily maintainable. So one of the ways to achieve reusability in these end-to-end tests is using a page object model. Like the word is complex, but it's the same thing. Like we have an object which mimics the interactions to a page. So like I might have a dashboard page object and it would have all of the interaction. We would already define all of the interactions that we go through the dashboard, like clicking an element, opening the drawer, or opening navigation bar. So all of those interactions will be defined in that page object. And whenever we are creating a test we'd create an instance of that page object and we'd interact to throw that page object. So what it helps us is with the reusability, obviously, and also making our codes more declarative. So if somebody is reading the test, he will know like what the test is actually doing rather than seeing just a bunch of clicks happening, like click this, click that. We won't have that, but mostly like first design.load this design, then open this component, then move this component or deploy this component. So anybody who is not even familiar with much of coding and can go through that test case and realize like we are going through the correct flow in that test case. Because that's also important, because if we wrote the test wrong, it doesn't matter. Like if it's not testing the right functionality, is a wrong test. So that's why keeping these tests declared to help us to know that the test itself is checking for the right thing, it's not doing something wrong. So this is a sample, like we have a visualizer page. We can have things like load the default view. We can have a load a particular view with an ID. We can have get the canvas and stuff like that. And this goes on the same line that Lee was talking about, like how Playwright and Cypress both out of the box don't support HTML5 canvas. So what we can have is like we can have objects like these, maybe a object for the canvas, which help us to acts as a proxy for the interactions that we would have with the canvas. Like you say we would have a canvas and we can say canvas dot drag these elements, canvas dot get an element. So we can have that reusability and also declarativeness. Another important thing is like to have a better test suite that can test most of the edge cases. Like we have to define a lot of tests, so testing each edge case, but that would be a lot of tests. So what we can do is like we can have parameterized tests. So these are tests that depend on a data set and have some dynamic parameters, so which we can change. So we can have a large number of tests. We can run large number of tests, but we have to write only small number of tests because these are dynamic and depend on data sets and samples. So let's say we have a test case for importing a design from some source, and we right now we support like 3-4 source. Like we can import a design from Kubernetes manifest, we can import a design from Helm chart. If we don't have parameterized tests, we have to write a test case for each of those, like a test case for checking if the import from Helm chart works, a test case for checking if an import from Kubernetes works. But with parameters test, we can just write a single test case and check on those multiple kinds of parameters. And on the same lines, we can also test a different multiple number of designs. Maybe we can test 10 designs, 20 designs. We don't need to write that many number of tests. This helps in maintaining the number of tests and getting the best out of each test, yes, and reusing them. And this also helps with doing fuzzy testing. And
I'm only leveraging what Lee has said, so I'm not gonna apologize. I am sorry for interrupting. Are we looking for contributors with to target this specifically and just focus on this? So not a drive-by contributor, because I have a sense that if we got drive-by contributors for this specific project, because everybody has their own style of writing code, I'm not sure if it's going to be completed in a timely manner, or if it's going to be done well enough to actually do what it's intended to do.
yeah, like there are few different ways we can achieve what we want here. Is first, like we need to write tests for all of the existing functionality that we have. And another part is like whenever we change something, so like if even if it's a drive by contributor, we need to make it sure like if somebody is changing something, first the test suite that we have, it should pass. And another thing is like if there's an additional functionality, there should be a new test case written for that. Without that, we can't accept more contribution, because then that is somebody else who has to write these tests, and then he would get the test cases wrong. So it's the same guy who adds the code should write and maintain the test case associated with that piece
So
of
we're
code.
targeting people who we know are not drive-by contributors. So we're seeking existing consistent contributors in the community with the skill and the willpower to do this. Are we going to make a call out anytime soon, like ask them to come forward, or is there a plan to get somebody on board soon?
like I said, like it doesn't matter. Like even if somebody is a drive-by contributor, he has to write the test case. So it's a necessity now. He has to maintain. If he has changed something, he has to maintain it. So this is the same thing. Like this is the same part of the functionality. Like for any functionality, we should have a test case for it. Like it's the same part. It's just like it's like doing it accountancy, like we have to do a credit and a debit. So it's the same thing. We have to write a test for any functionality that we add. But for these, like for getting a test suite ready, we might want like the contributors that we have here and maintenance, they might definitely help in getting a test suite up and running. But it's both the driver contributors and the ones that are already here, all of can help with this thing. And anybody can work with this thing easily. And that's why we're laying these guidelines so anybody can get productive with it. So it doesn't remain something internal.
Yep. Yeah. It ends up being, it ends up being both, or that it ends up being that it's nearly always desired that the same single mind focuses on an area and maintains focus on that area, because it drives consistency largely, is why the same single mind is on there. Yeah. So to Sandra's point, it's very helpful to have as we go to build some steam behind this, that there's a person or two or a few that are focused here and helping build it out and establish a bunch of practices and principles to follow, or just guidelines, or just conventions that like, oh, hey, we do it like this generally because of this. And it's in part what Christopher is calling out is like, there's an existing contributor page in Meshery docs. There's contributor pages for every component. And actually, there's a contributor page specifically for end-to-end tests using Cypress. So to Christopher's point, we need to replace that one with, here's how you do end-to-end tests using Playwright. Part of what Abid is saying is also true, and that is, and it's in part what Christopher's pointing out, is like, once there has been a body of work established, that yep, even for the occasional contributor, what Meshery would ideally be doing is, like, every time that someone submits a PR, there would sort of be a checklist that says like, have docs been considered for, have tests been updated, I don't know, has a tweet been made, or like whatever the checklist is. For some PRs, that's very, very appropriate and meaningful. It certainly slows the works way down and certainly is a barrier to many people who would contribute. It also helps us slow down and focus on quality. Like there's a balance to these things, but it ends up being both, that like, yep, a person or a few people need to help build up momentum and make this thing real. And this body of work here is a significant boon to that, or a start to that. I don't know that any of this has any of this landed in the code base today for Meshery UI?
No, like
Okay.
there's not a PR about in Meshery.
Good, great. Or okay, good. Or I mean, good and bad. Like it would be great if you said yes. It's also great if you say no, or rather just understanding the state of it. So this is an excellent body of work for like that page that I was saying in Meshery docs on how to make end-to-end tests with Cypress. You wrote it here in a Google Doc. You need to copy and paste this into the Meshery docs site and get started. And yeah, that they would ideally be written consistently. Of what I've seen of, well, who knows? This is coming from an ignoramus. So it didn't seem like we could get it too totally wrong in Playwright, but maybe we can. There will be a certain initial body of work that gets reused every which way, which is like, oh, when Meshery is first deployed, and you open up the UI, you need to authenticate. And like there'll be a few functions or reusable tests that, so there's some common substrate that, yeah, there's a one-time effort to overcome. And then much of it ends up being quite reusable. And over time, I guess the hope is it's relatively easy to sustain or to maintain. And or anyway, I figured like, yeah. So Sandra, I'm like, hey, we should do that. We sent out a tweet actually about, I don't know why I keep talking about Twitter. It's just completely random. But we did tweet about this training and trying to get some momentum behind it. And a number of you are here. Wonderful. And so the reason that Abid is going through all this isn't for his pleasure and it isn't for mine, even though I'm still an ignoramus. It's for all of you. And it's for all of you to say, hey, I think I'm interested and I want to bite that off or do this, or I don't like that, or just have an understanding of what's going on and continue to stay focused in your area or whatever it is. But yeah, this whole thing is one big fat solicitation to all of you. And it's also I don't know what it is, but this training and solicitation. And so yeah, Christopher, we should make sure that there's a super short version of this, that just like for the occasional contributor, if there is some consideration around a change that's been made in the UI, they may not know Playwright at all. Hey, you really don't need to. Just make sure that this thing or whatever. Or like the question would very frequently be, I opened a PR and 9 of the 10 checks passed, except this one failed, and it's the end-to-end test on, like, what am I supposed to do? How do I look at that? Like answering that question would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, the part of the thing is like when we have enough of these reusable blocks of like these page object models and all of the setup tests will be already written for any new contributor. It would be mostly like he won't need to change anything in these complex parts, but it will be just changing the flow. Maybe from like maybe he had just changed some locator from a button to maybe an anchor link, so he would only need to change that small part in these tests, and maybe just a small spec has changed. Maybe we have started accepting some weird kind of email address, so we just need to change that. We don't need to do any of this complex plumbing anywhere in the new tests, and we just, when we would reuse these objects, we have to define the behavior in pretty simple language, like just loading a design should be pretty easy. He doesn't need to do everything himself. He just needs to call a function in this page. So it's just the normal user behavior would be documented in code form, and that would be tested. So those should be easier to maintain, and even for a new user, it's like hiding the much complex DS, having our own kind of DSL for these tests, which should be should be
Okay.
simple.
Because my question stemmed from thinking that they would actually need to write the complex, tests and not just adjust the existing tests already
Yeah.
to add to functionality and so on.
Yeah, most of times the thing is like with a good test suite, most of times a user should need to change the test, but it's just when we fix a bug, we shouldn't need to change the test case. We should only change the test case when we actually change the behavior of a feature. So when we change a feature, then only we should change the test case. And when we have a bug, we change the code, not the test. So most of times a contributor won't need to fiddle around this region. So
Is there an initial effort here to like migrate the existing tests to Playwright?
yeah, there would be like most of the existing tests will be migrated to Playwright, and all of this setup would be done. All of these reusable fixtures and all of the setup functions and seeding functions would be created. So it should be fairly easy and productive to go along and create other tests. The thing is like when we have most of these already defined, all of these fixtures is just knowing what the spec was previously and just rewriting it. So it should be pretty simple after we have a decent framework of this.
Maybe sometimes I hear I might have said no to what Chris had asked, because I think what I heard Chris asking was like, hey, I'm considering maybe helping here. There's something about this that intrigues. Maybe that was it. Or maybe he was just trying to be a good steward of like the project in general and sort of asking a strategic question like, hey, it seems like a good next step would be, we've got some tests. We would translate those. Then we would take a step back and look at what more tests we have to write. And whether he's looking at help, getting his fingers dirty directly or not. I think part of the answer here is, hey, is anyone currently doing that? And if anyone wants to, in a very tactful way, where do they start? Because this backstory is great. Like what a unit test is, great. I feel like I might walk away with a diploma. And I would say that in the most a-hole sarcastic way that I can. Like, thank you for that, by the way. And then as we like, where does the rubber meet the road? Where if people want to get their fingers dirty, it might be one of those things where you're like, well, some anxiety fills you right now. Like, hey, we're just not quite ready. There's a little bit of groundwork that needs to be laid, and then, everybody can, jump in. But I think that's the question.
Yeah, that's the only thing. When we just need to lay out all of these stuff and the reusable stuff, then we can start on migrating all of those test cases, but then it will be easier to do that. So yeah, we do need to get the groundwork going.
Good. We is a very super inclusive word, and we use it all the time. It's wonderful. But who specifically in this case? I guess you like one, hey, is anyone on the call looking to get engaged? It's not a hard commitment, but just so you wanting to try to keep pace with it. And then B, Abid, by default, I'm associating your name with the individual to help us get that initial layout structured. But maybe that isn't you. I'm not sure. You might want to tell people about, there's some other things to tell people, but given the time left, we should probably get some names and faces associated so that as we go to further organize this area, we can make sure that all of those people keep abreast and are empowered to do something if it's time for them to do something.
Yeah, I guess Leo, like what would be a good process for something like this to be translated into, say, like issues that people can pick up? Like, is this sufficient? Like, could we just like create like a, hey, convert Cypress test to Playwright and throw it on GitHub, or does there need to be more planning, I suppose?
Part of I'm looking for Abid to answer. Like, let's say that we have some of the common substrate about like authentication or like common practices of how to use await or when not to. Like, let's say that that's done. To me, it would seem like, yep, hey, there's a one-time transitional effort from these to those, but that to Jared's point, that as you're doing it, this may seem like a step backwards for some of you, but the reality is, if you don't work with spreadsheets today, you're going to touch them at some point. Like, well, actually, like a spreadsheet that sort of lists out what we collectively, you all consider to be features that should probably be flexed during a particular pull request over time. So Jared, I think the answer is like, it's both. It's both like, hey, the very tactfully that these could be opened up as a number of different GitHub issues so that people can bite off one or two. But that, yeah, they should probably be done in context of a spreadsheet. There's a spreadsheet out there that has Meshery test plans currently. It doesn't have to be the most itemized and the most, but like to at least begin to start organizing things. There's a spreadsheet, a very long spreadsheet that lists out all of the features of Meshery. And it's too long, longer than any of you want to deal with, actually. But that might be a good starting point, or some briefer version of it, and to just begin to prioritize what tests are we going to get a lot of value of and sequence them like that? So I hope that it's always difficult when I answer a question. It's like, hope that I leave no ambiguity, that none of you would step on certainly my toes, or I suspect Abid's toes, if you were to say, great, thanks, and you go off and run with it. So, like, that was one perspective. Like, there's other ways of accomplishing it. Is it going to be
Yeah, I
wrong?
think like it's pretty necessary for us to lay out all of this and then get more and more contributors, because we have a pretty large set of features that we support, and all of those need to be tested. So definitely need more and more contributors here, and people who can take authorship of these, and maybe maintaining some section of the test, because there would be decent amount of these tests. Maybe somebody can maintain a section of these tests also and lead that.
Abid, what are we good? Hey, there's some people here on the call that are ready to help out on some things. Are you ready for them to help out? Do we have, what if anything can or should people do? Should someone take that list right there, open up a GitHub issue, or put that list into a spreadsheet? We know that that's one piece of work to be done. Is anyone taking on the initial substrate of like the authenticate some of the reusable bits? Is anyone taking on the task of translating this into a Meshery doc or something that just gets published and marked down? Those are all things that people.
Yeah, like I'm already taking up on the task of doing this common substrate for these and getting all this going up. And it should be fairly quick. We should get that quickly done. It won't take too much of time. And also, then we should start doing the migration of the existing tests. It's mostly migrating the spec, where we do need to do a line by line migration of the Cypress test. We just need to know what the test was doing and do that in Playwright right now.
Okay, good. Well, okay, so my read on that answer was you're going to come back with the answer, which is you got a couple more steps.
That's what I got as well.
You're going to come back, you're going to do a couple of steps. Hey, I get it, man. Like, I don't know how many times I've been in a conversation just like this. And it's like, if you empower anyone right now, it'll just be a bigger mess or something. And before it gets a little bit of organization, just the first bit of organization, there's a lot more to come. But so in relatively short order, it sounds like you'll be probably communicating on I mean, Slack is great and horrific at the same time. Who the hell can keep up with that
Yep.
thing? That's all that I do. Right? I don't even check email anymore. That's how. We underuse the mailing list here, and there's posterity there and reference that can be done. We use the discussion forum some, but between those two things, it's easier for people to search and find things on the discussion forum, and it's not lost to the annals of enterprise Slack that we don't have. And the same thing for the mailing list. There's the developers at meshery.io. If you go to meshery.io/subscribe, you'll see the lists that are there. And so it sounds like Abid will get some, and he might even work with some of you privately, or not privately, but like after this call a little bit, to formulate some of that initial organization and propagate that out. Does that sound about what you're?
Yeah, exactly. So I will get this ready, and we can then define what next, test to target next, and we can start working on them. Because right now, if somebody wants to work, he would just get lost.
Now, that doesn't mean that if you are interested, not to go do the hello world of Playwright, not to go maybe familiarize with the Visual Studio extension. It seems convenient if that's your IDE. Not to. There's also one other thing that I don't know that you were able to show just yet. I know you weren't able to get through everything, but there's when the tests run, there's some amount of workflow that might be reporting some of the specific test results. And so you don't have
Yeah,
to.
there are a bunch of workflows used. Yeah, that's also a nice part for the CI/CD guys who are more familiar with that to improve that.
I don't know if anybody, I know we're over time. Say something that should give you all hope, maybe, is there's a bunch of integration tests that run for Meshery's adapters. And many of you probably aren't familiar with them because it's just not, hasn't been a focus of the project for a while. Those tests run and they self-report, they auto-document and self-report in Meshery docs. There's a compatibility matrix there. The data behind that is coming from GitHub workflows. As the workflow goes and it runs a test, if it passed or failed, the end results, that markdown is just written over to auto-committed to Meshery docs to the Meshery repo. You pull up the compatibility matrix and you'll see. So we don't have to be super, so we can be fancy if we need to, but that's something that can come over time. Just figured I'd point out. Hey, Jared had to take off. That's because we're over time. And would it be okay if maybe we just initialized either a discussion forum post or a mailing list thread? Just if for nothing else, just to say we had a great meeting today and here's the topic, and that way others can chime in. I mean, using Slack it is fine and people can chime in there,
Yeah.
but also.
I think a discussion post.
Okay, great. Yeah, I keep forgetting that I'm the host. I'm sort of waiting for Abid to tie us off. Hey, we're over time. People are dropping like flies. And so thanks a bunch for coming today. And it's nice to see you all. We'll see what we can do with Playwright. Yeah, we'll see if we don't get an earlier meeting too. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Chris. Bye, guys.